And it's my honor and privilege now to invite Justice Chandrachud, former Chief Justice of India, to deliver his keynote address.
Dr. Mithu Allur, Dr. Farooq Udwadia, Dr. Shomiran Nandi, Dr. Ashish Shelar, all the very distinguished doctors who are present here, both from India and overseas, everyone associated with ADAPT, whose hearts have brought them together this morning, and all the guests present here. A very good morning to all of you. The launch of ADAPT's first journal, the Journal of Inclusion and Disability, finds a deep resonance in all our hearts, which is why we are here. My gratitude to Dr. Shomiran Nandi, the editor-in-chief, whose pioneering work as a surgeon at Sir Gangaram Hospital in Delhi and mentorship of generations of doctors have shaped the character and identity of the medical profession. Every Saturday morning at 8, Dr. Nandi is unfailingly at his class for his students at Gangaram, whether it was during or after or before COVID. To Dr. Farooq Udwadia, whose wisdom finds reflection in his writings, his commitment to patient care, scholarship, and profound understanding of the linkages between medicine and society, continue to inspire us all. And to Dr. Mithu Allur, the founder and guiding light of ADAPT, whose vision of inclusion has touched thousands of families. To be in your company this morning is both humbling and energizing. Each of you represents not just excellence in your fields of endeavor, but above all the moral courage to take up causes when no one thought of them. The courage to reimagine the transformative potential of science when combined with care, inclusion, and human dignity. The edifice of our Constitution rests safely on three pillars: liberty, equality, and fraternity, each of which has an inseparable connect with human dignity. These are not just phrases frozen on constitutional parchment. They are the architecture of a living, vibrant republic. Today, as we gather around yet another milestone in the social existence of ADAPT, we witness much more than the birth of a publication. This is a turning point in India's long road towards inclusiveness, as it links contemporary advances in medicine with our vision for a just and inclusive existence. The journal is founded on the belief that objectivity, analysis, and reason constitute the fundamentals of science. But this launch is a part of a broader narrative in which law, policy, science, and the lived voices of persons with disabilities move forward together in the realization that together our voices are critical to reimagine the society we wish for us and for the future to inhabit. Malini Chib's autobiography titled One Little Finger originates within the ADAPT family. She writes poignantly about communication and agency in places where voices have long been silenced. Through the use of a single typing finger, she reclaims her narrative and shatters the barriers, not of cerebral palsy alone, but barriers imposed by society. Her work reminds us that inclusion is not theory, but a lived reclamation of voice. As Neil Marcus, a prominent figure in the disability rights movement, said, "Disability is an ingenious way to live. Allow that ingenuity to influence how we draft policies, create structures, and design schools and cities." Standing here at the intersection of the potential and the possible, I feel a deep personal resonance. Kalpana and I are parents to two wonderful girls, Priyanka and Mahi, born in a remote village in Uttarakhand, who came into our lives during my tenure as the Chief Justice of the Allahabad High Court. They live with a rare neuromuscular condition called Nemeline myopathy, which challenges them in simple everyday tasks that so many of us take for granted. We struggled, as so many families do, to find medical professionals who knew something about this. Find a school whose computer and science labs provide physical access to these children who are blessed with a searching social conscience, and a home in Delhi that could be accessed on their wheelchairs. Every public space reflects the same inaccessibility. Our lives had to be built around their needs. Accessibility for everyone must become the default for every space. I remember how during the intrusive and difficult diagnostic process for my elder daughter in the PGI in Lucknow, which involved the taking of a sample of tissue with no anesthesia, she cried as she said, "I do not want my sister to go through this." That moment stayed with us. What we could not bear was the pain our little girl was enduring. Yet in that moment, her instinct was not for herself but for her sister. Even in the most fragile of circumstances, the purest form of strength is the ability to care for another. Dignity is no more than an abstract desire. It is a design problem that must be tackled not eventually but now. Today's gathering is not just ceremonial. It's a recommitment to our belief that our society must anticipate human variety, that inclusion cannot be postponed, and that scholarship from journals like the one we have inaugurated today must move from paper to practice. We must together honor the Constitution's promise by beginning here in this room and reverberating out into every school, clinic, courtroom, and home. Institutions are important in our journey towards an inclusive society, not merely for the services which they deliver, but for the ideas they represent and the change that they enable. For well over 50 years, ADAPT has adhered to that paradigm. Founded in 1972 by Dr. Mittu Allur, what began as a modest project for schooling for children labeled spastic blossomed into able, disable, all people together. ADAPT is an acronym which personifies inclusion. ADAPT offered education, treatment, vocational training, and parental assistance under one roof at a period when disadvantaged children were all too often overlooked by public services. Over time, it expanded into teacher training programs in both urban and rural communities, launched community-based rehabilitation initiatives, and established an advocacy platform that influenced public attitudes, language, and policy. Its impact has affected thousands of lives, not only by aiding children, but by empowering families, educators, and communities, something which I saw during my walk through this morning. If ADAPT's early decades were about hearing and affirmation, the last decade has been about institution building, a shift from individual effect to systemic design. Today's debut represents the latest step in that journey. In addition to providing care, they are also contributing to scholarship. The journal represents science which lives in the community, and a community which trusts in the rationality of science. Hence, this journal is not just a publication, it is ADAPT's newest promise to the community it serves. In her memoir, which is titled Being Human, an unrepented memoir of a disability rights activist, Judith Human writes, and I quote, "When institutions do not want to do something, claiming it is a safety issue, it's an easy argument to fall back upon. It sounds so benign and protective. How could caring about safety possibly be wrong or discriminatory? The sentence is an urgent reminder that what masquerades as care, if it goes unchecked, becomes a source of exclusion." The application of this lesson is in the work by ADAPT, which questions the easy justifications that allow inaccessibility to continue. They demonstrate that equity is more than just treating everyone equally. It is about understanding the hurdles which our mental attitudes and our physical creations impose on persons with disabilities. It is about ensuring that each person has the tools, opportunity, and environment they require to thrive. That is the most evolved form of equality. The creation of equal opportunities for the disabled is not a gift which society confers. It defines the very society that we build now and for the future. The central idea in Helen Keller's essays is that the tragedy does not lie in disability, but in the attitudes towards it and the systems, the social systems around it. The tragedy lies not in what nature creates, but how others handle their lives in response to disability. Today, I'm privileged to be in the midst of people whose work exemplifies Keller's philosophy in action. We participate in the launch of a journal that unites scholarship with lived experience, a pairing which is far too rare, but vital if we are to truly understand disability. Martha Nussbaum, a philosopher, refers to the capabilities approach, the belief that ultimate justice is allowing people to do and be what they value. This concept connects strongly with disability rights. As a judge, I saw numerous situations where systemic barriers, whether architectural, procedural, or attitudinal, eroded the dignity of people with disabilities. In her memoir, Haben, the deaf-blind woman who conquered Harvard Law, Haben Girma reminds us that success is not about disabled people overcoming their condition, but about institutions overcoming their barriers. Her journey to Harvard was also possible because technology was adapted and systems were made accessible, showing us that inclusion is never an act of charity. It's a design choice that unlocks human potential. This journal has the potential to do precisely that by telling stories in the language of data and lived truth. Initiatives like this journal are important because they exist in a unique space where activism meets academia and advocacy meets evidence. It is a place where the story is one of rights, not charity, of respect rather than pity. Most importantly, it reminds us that inclusion is not a favor that we grant, it's the fulfillment of a constitutional and moral obligation. As we celebrate this launch, I hope we also see it as an invitation to policymakers, scholars, educators, and citizens to engage with the complex realities of disabilities, to challenge complacency, and to build a society in which the question is never whether someone belongs, but rather how we can ensure that each one of us belongs to a universe in which disability is just another reflection of its diversity. I want to briefly speak about disability rights in India. Where do we stand? This is an arena where constitutional ideas, legislative reform, and judicial interpretation intersect in profoundly humane ways. Over the years, I've had the opportunity and responsibility to interpret the law in instances that directly affect the dignity, autonomy, and equality of people with disabilities. Our progress has been genuine, but it has also been uneven, frequently spurred by landmark decisions and sustained campaigning rather than fundamental change. Often, the true test of our constitutional values lies not in grand declarations, but in how we respond to the everyday struggles of individuals who seek nothing more than an equal chance. In the case of Om Rathod versus the Director General of Health Services in 2024, a young applicant who was successful at the NEET exam, but with over 80% mobility impairment, aspired to become a doctor. The disability assessment boards turned him away consistently, based solely on statistical benchmarks. But we insisted in the Supreme Court that judgment be based on what we could do, not on what he lacked, on what we could do, not what we had set up to deny. We conducted a reassessment by a good doctor by the name of Dr. Satyendra Singh, an experienced medical doctor who uses assisted devices, and that showed that he was capable of pursuing an MBBS degree. The decision shifted the focus from disability to ability and set the precedent for how medical admission should be reimagined. This judgment became the forerunner for the National Medical Commission's interim guidelines. on disability and medical admissions. Yet progress in regulation came with fault lines. In an article recently written in the print, Dr. Satyendra Singh, who is himself a physician with a mobility impairment and an intervener in the case before the Supreme Court, pointed out the fault lines in the National Medical Commission's interim guidelines framed in the aftermath of the judgment. The guidelines, he explained, reduced the worth of a candidate to arbitrary physical tasks. Can you climb stairs? Can you bear weight on your limb? As if medicine were measured only in muscle and bone. They ignore whether a ramp could replace the stairs, or whether technology and support could enable the student to practice medicine effectively. In doing so, they shift the burden from the institution to the individual, demanding that the disabled body adapt while the system remains rigid. The so-called requirement that a candidate must have both hands intact, with intact sensation and sufficient strength, was censured by the Supreme Court as an ableist and unconstitutional rule. Equally invasive was the insistence on self-declarations, where students must spell out what they cannot do, a process that diminishes dignity and entrenches exclusion. Representation too was tokenistic. Only one person with disability, without deep grounding in disability justice, was placed on the drafting committee for the rules. But despite repeated judicial directions to revise these norms within fixed timelines, the NMC has continued to delay, leaving institutions and candidates without clarity. These fault lines remind us that progress in the courtroom must be matched by sincerity in policy. Dr. Singh speaks not as a distant advocate, but as someone who has lived this reality. He writes, and I quote, "I too have a mobility impairment. I cannot stand unsupported on one leg. Stairs have never been my friend, and yet I serve in a medical institutions. I have taught, practiced, published, and argued in the highest court in the land." Likewise, we have the example of Dr. Suresh Advani, one of the greatest oncologists who has ministered care on a wheelchair. We must guard against reverting to rigid clinical checkboxes. The system must center on human capability, not just medical percentage, and that remains a crucial ongoing conversation. This is precisely why in Om Rathod, we went beyond statistical disability to grant admission for a disabled student at the MBBS degree course, because lived capability, not numerical percentages, must guide inclusion. Another young girl who came to knocking at our doors in the Supreme Court got the same direction that she should be admitted to the government medical college here, one of the government medical colleges in Mumbai. She was good enough to get admission to a government medical college, but was denied only because she didn't have full strength in both her hands. The Supreme Court intervened. The other day, a young lawyer who appeared for her came to me after my retirement and said, "I just wanted to tell you that she's doing brilliantly in college." Perhaps the greatest and the clearest testament to this constitutional journey came when the Supreme Court revisited its own position on who can serve as a judge. In an earlier ruling, the Supreme Court had barred blind candidates from entering the district judiciary. The rationale was that you must be able to assess the demeanor of a witness in a murder case, for instance, or in a rape case. How can a blind candidate assess the demeanor of a witness? So was the argument. That exclusion has now been overturned. The reversal is not just a legal correction, it's a moral one. It affirms that the capacity to judge does not lie in the eye, but in the mind and in the heart, and that the judiciary, like the republic it serves, must reflect the full range of human possibilities. Again, in Vikash Kumar versus Union Public Service Commission in 2021, a civil service aspirant with a writer's cramp, which is called dysgraphia, had been denied the services of a scribe simply because his condition was not recognized as a benchmark disability under the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016. We determined that the refusal was illegal, identifying reasonable accommodation as a fundamental component of equality. This principle, derived from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, has now become a judicial standard for determining whether public institutions are truly inclusive. Empowerment is not shaped by the law alone. It is also shaped by the stories we tell and the images we see. In Nipun Malhotra versus Sony Pictures, again in 2024, the Supreme Court dealt with a film which reduced persons with disabilities to caricatures, passing it as humor. There was a person who suffered from dementia who was called Bhulakkad in the movie. There was someone who had a stammer, and the movie referred to him as an atki hui record. I remember that still. The court urged the entertainment industry to frame guidelines for respectful, authentic representation. When disability is shown only as a pitiable condition, it robs individuals of dignity as much as any denial of opportunity would. But when storytellers choose authenticity, they expand our capacity for empathy, belonging, and shared humanity. From this standpoint, there is something intrinsically beautiful about Amir Khan's latest contribution, Sitare Zameen Par. Our daughters have watched it thrice, each time with a high five, complimented with lots of popcorn. What these judgments really show us is that equality is lived in many forms. It is shaped as much by how society portrays difference as by how it designs its common spaces. Culture teaches us who belongs. Architecture decides who can enter. When the two work together, dignity moves from an aspiration to an everyday reality. A turning point in accessibility jurisprudence materialized in the decision in Rajiv Raturi versus Union of India. The Supreme Court stated unequivocally that accessibility of public spaces is not a favor, nor is it simply a future hope. Rather, it's an enforceable fundamental right that stands shoulder to shoulder with every other liberty granted by our Constitution. We called upon the Center for Disability Studies at Nalsar in Hyderabad, Dr. Amita Dhanda, to do a whole comprehensive research project on public spaces in India. We established timetables for new and existing public infrastructure to meet universal design and accessibility requirements, and we introduced social audits for the first time, allowing progress to be objectively measured and enforced. In so doing, accessibility was elevated from a question of optional compliance to a standard of accountability. For people with disabilities, this decision represented more than just legal reform. It was an acknowledgement of their dignity, autonomy, and the promise of a society in which barriers are gradually removed. Following the Rajiv Raturi judgment, the union government issued harmonized standards for public infrastructure, transport, and digital platforms. These are welcome steps, though the call for binding statutory rules under Section 40 of the RPWD Act still remains an unfinished task. The conversation over accessibility has subsequently spread to the digital realm. In a major decision, the Supreme Court of India has recognized digital accessibility as an element of the right to life and personal liberty. The decision in Pragya Prasoon and in Amar Jain versus Union of India tackles the exclusion of people with disabilities from digital know your customer, or what we call KYC processes, and calls for broad reforms across regulatory and service frameworks. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, MeitY's guidelines for Indian government websites, which is GIGW 3.0, now mandate that all government websites conform to WCAG 2.1 level AA standards, a critical policy step that, if faithfully implemented and independently monitored, could bring true accessibility into our digital lives. In the field of education, in Disabled Rights Group versus Union of India, the court made it clear that reservations in colleges and jobs for persons with disabilities are not just tokens of goodwill, they are a concrete promise of equality. Disability rights in India are at the crossroads. The legislative framework is stronger than ever, grounded in the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016 and informed by progressive judicial interpretations. But the lived experience of many persons with disabilities still reflects systemic neglect. That is why research, policy innovation, and ongoing public participation are critical. We have to continue to shift from a welfare to a rights-based approach in which accessibility, reasonable accommodation, and inclusion are viewed as fundamental guarantees rather than as concessions. A young Rhodes Scholar wrote to me several years ago and said, I want to give up my chance to do an MPhil and a DPhil at Oxford and come and work with you as a law clerk in the Supreme Court. And I said, why on earth would someone want to give up a Rhodes Scholarship and come and work with me? But he came there not to learn, but I think Providence brought him to the Supreme Court to teach. He told me some of the basic facts about the lack of accessibility in the Supreme Court. With his help, we set up a website, a CAPTCHA for the website, which was not only visual, but which was also audio for persons with eyesight impairment. We completely redesigned our digital framework in the Supreme Court. We conduct a social audit of the entirety of the Supreme Court premises. And finally, I'd like to just refer to a personal reflection on law meets life. For me, as I said, this became a question of life, not just a question of law. As a parent to daughters with Nemeline myopathy, my spouse and I have lived in the most intimate sense the reality that the law seeks to address. Every threshold too high, every stair without a ramp, every document without an accessible format, these are not abstractions. They are the barriers that determine whether a child may attend school, a young woman can take her position in the profession, or a citizen can assume her rightful role in society. They are in truth the difference between exclusion and belonging. I recall vividly the countless small negotiations that defined our ordinary days, the search for schools that would welcome, the worry about whether a house had been designed with their need and dignity in mind, the question of whether a journey could be made without humiliation. For a parent, these questions weigh not only on logistics but on love. They are reminders that our children are constantly fighting for the space that others at times take for granted. It is in those moments that the abstract promise of equality becomes an urgent flesh and blood demand. This lived perspective has shown me the true stakes of inclusive design and reasonable accommodation. They are not technical mandates, not the language of bureaucratic compliance. They are the scaffolding of human dignity. A ramp is not merely concrete poured at an angle. It is a bridge to education, to work, to friendship. Screen reading software is not simply a technical add-on in procurement. It is the voice by which knowledge is claimed. Reasonable accommodation is far from being an act of benevolence. It is the recognition that human beings come in infinite forms and that our public spaces, our schools, our workplaces, and our cities must be built to embrace that infinite diversity. Every family in its own way grapples with vulnerability, whether through disability, illness, age, or circumstance. Just as I was driving here, I got a call saying that my 80-plus mother-in-law has just had a hip fracture in Bangalore. Each of us will at some moment need a world that is more accommodating, more humane. The task for inclusion, therefore, is not the responsibility of a few. It is the need of all. To design for inclusion is to build a society that reflects its highest ideals, one where difference is not erased but celebrated, where dignity is not conditional but guaranteed. That is why the movement from welfare to rights is so vital. Welfare is something which is bestowed, something that can be withheld or withdrawn. Rights, in contrast, are owned. They are the foundation of citizenship. My own journey as a father has made me believe with even greater conviction that accessibility, accommodation, and inclusion must be claimed in that language of rights. Only then can we create a society where no child, no parent, no family feels that they stand at the margins of our shared circle of life. Just 2 weeks ago, As we packed the last of our belongings and prepared to move into a new home, I was struck all over again by how profoundly environment defines our ability to belong. Our house is more than just bricks and walls. It has been tailored by necessity for the needs of Priyanka and Mahi, from wheelchair accessible entries to a custom ICU corner with respiratory support and space for therapists and nurses. I remember standing in the empty hallway as a contractor adjusted one final rail near the bathing area and thinking, this is not privilege, this is inclusion. It's what every family should find and build into the world around them. This is the minimum a society must guarantee its people. For families like ours, suitable housing is not an optional comfort. It is essential to life, learning, and sustenance. And even if I, as a parent with every possible resource at hand, must wait months for a home that can sustain my daughter's needs, how much more urgent is the call upon our institutions and our cities to keep pace? Now, from burden to innovation and a freedom metaphor, we must overturn the calculus that treats accessibility as a cost to be minimized. The truth, borne out by evidence, is that inclusion is innovation's engine and prosperity's ally. Consider the curb cut effect. The measures that are designed for a specific barrier end up improving life for everyone, for older adults, parents with strollers, delivery workers, travelers with luggage. Accessibility in this light is civilization's most enduring innovation, a design choice that compounds social return. The same pattern holds in the digital commons. When we build websites and apps that work with screen readers, captions, high contrast modes, and keyboard navigation, we serve not only people with disabilities, we enhance usability and reach for all users. Markets see this as a dividend as well. Multi-year analysis show that companies leading on disability inclusion outperform their peers with higher revenue growth, net income, and economic profit margins because they tap a vast talent pool of the disabled, reduce turnover, and unlock product innovation. Inclusion is not a concession to ideals, it's a competitive strategy that strengthens balance sheets and societies alike. Beyond firms and websites lies the deeper economy of dignity. The World Health Organization UNICEF Global Report on Assistive Technology estimates that 2.5 billion individuals need one or more assistive goods, such as wheelchairs, hearing aids, or communication apps, but nearly 1 billion are refused access. That is more than just a procurement gap. It's a barrier to education, work, and independent living. When helpful technologies reach people, participation increases. When they don't, exclusion burdens families, schools, employers, and the public purse. On the subject of costs, the conventional wisdom is mistaken. Thoughtful universal design and early accessibility can often add marginal upfront costs while averting for far higher expenses from retrofits, litigation, and lost productivity. Think of it this way, it's actually more expensive to leave people out than it is to include them. Economic experts have found that the money we lose from not letting people with disabilities work, go to school, or get good health care is much, much greater than the small amount it costs to make things accessible for everyone. All this brings us back to the Constitution's promise of liberty. Our fundamental document guarantees liberty of thought, expression, faith, belief, and worship. But liberty without accessibility is like a book which is sealed shut. It exists, but it cannot be read. Instead of just adding a little detail to a building or website, we need to think of these things as what they truly are, tools for freedom. A simple ramp isn't just a convenience, it's the hinge that opens the door to a building for someone in a wheelchair. Captioning on a video isn't just a helpful note, it's the voice that allows a hearing impaired person to understand the conversation. And assistive technology isn't a crutch, it's the key that unlocks knowledge for those who couldn't access it before. When we design with inclusion at the core, we are not adding amenities, we are unlocking freedom in its most practical form. Accessibility is simply engineering freedom for all of us. And the evidence shows that when we do this, our societies become smarter, fairer, and more prosperous. And then my final call. I have spoken of the social deficit in realizing rights and dignity for the disabled. Equally, there is a real need for spurring the growth of robust medical research in the diagnosis and treatment of several forms of disability, including rare genetic conditions. At present, the cost of some of the new therapies and drugs, say from Nebelin myopathy, is prohibitive. How do we provide cost-effective care? Take a case of sickle cell anemia, where the IIT has provided homegrown, low-cost treatment. At a public health policy level, funding tends to be directed to those areas which will result in impacting the largest number of people. Justifiably so, because the largest number of people had suffered from malaria. So public health funding naturally goes to those areas where you require or you impact the largest number of persons. But that cannot be the only test. This journal, to my mind, will provide a benchmark for research and academic writing. The private and public sectors must be encouraged to invest in providing low-cost solutions for countries in the global south, including India. In treating as we are here for the launch, let us remember that inclusion is not a kindness we offer, but a right we are bound to uphold. It is built in the classroom, in the workplace, on our screens, on our pavements, and in our laws. It begins with listening to voices that have too often been silenced and ensuring that they shape the future we all share. My hope is that this platform, under the auspices of ADAPT, becomes not just a repository of research, but a bridge between knowledge and lived experience, a reminder that a society is measured not by how it treats the powerful, but by how it embraces those who confront the greatest barriers which we impose on them by design or by accident. The work before us is unfinished, but each step we take here brings us closer to a world where dignity is not demanded but simply lived. And therefore, in conclusion, we celebrate the great vision of Dr. Mithu Allur and everyone associated with ADAPT, which has taken dignity for those who need it the most to a different level. May we have 1 million more ADAPTs and 1 million successes for them. Thank you.